Good evening and welcome to episode 2 of the Development Sector Dialogues. This is a series that happens on the fourth Saturday of every month. And these dialogues hope to bring thought leaders, social entrepreneurs, grassroots practitioners, and development sector professionals onto a common platform with the idea that ideas can be exchanged, knowledge and experiences shared, and solutions to common challenges can be discussed and hopefully co-crafted as well as created. In episode 2, the question we are debating is NEP 2020. Is it a game changer for New India and the challenges of realizing its impact as well as sustainability? These sessions are brought to you jointly by VLEAD, SVYM, and Prakalpa Saujanya Foundation. The Vivekananda Institute for Leadership Development, VLEAD, can also be viewed as an acronym for the Vivekananda Institute for Leadership, Education and Development, as these are the three core areas of our engagement. VLEAD is an initiative of SVYM, which is a development organization engaged in building a new civil society in India through its grassroots to policy level actions spanning health, education, community development, and capacity building. VLEAD is also an innovation and capacity building lab where ideas are spawned, innovation is nurtured, and leadership is encouraged. And VLEAD is the place to come to if you're someone looking to incubate your idea, experiment, build your skill sets, enhance your talent stack, and contribute to society and make a dent in the sector. Prakalpa Saujanya, which in Sanskrit means a project for social good, is a not-for-profit Section 8 company launched in October 2021 with the endeavor to provide affordable solutions for social sector organizations in order to achieve sustainable outcomes. This initiative was started by a group of project management professionals with the mission to enable the development sector by applying proven processes through domain expertise, collaborative learning, and technology-driven empowerment. Prakalpa has evolved a comprehensive suite of programs focusing on enabling, energizing, empowering organizations adopting the practitioner's approach with emphasis on delivery of benefits, impact analysis, and sustainability. Prakalpa believes the initiative will enable social sector organizations to develop more effective and innovative solutions and bring about transformational change. It's also my pleasure to introduce the interlocutors for today. Praveen Kumar S is the guest who's going to be speaking about the topic. He studied mechanical engineering at IIT Madras and has worked as a science and mathematics facilitator for over 14 years. Praveen is also the Chief Strategy Officer and Head Education at Swami Vivekananda Youth Movement, where he oversees the education activities of the organization. He designed and set up with his team the first science exploratory park of the state of Karnataka at Saragur, Kote taluk, which was subsequently replicated at Jamshedpur by Tata Steel. Through his work with science teachers, he has built a network of over 2,000 teachers across the state of Karnataka, and which works for their capacity building. His work was listed among the 20 most innovative uses of technology in education in India. He has also participated in drafting Vision 2025 education policy document of the government of Karnataka. Today's session will be moderated by Amar Bhaskar. Amar Bhaskar is a management and leadership consultant, a postgraduate in applied mathematics, and a certified project management professional with over 35 years of experience in the information technology domain with a long stint at IBM. Amar is one of the founder board members of the Project Management Institute Bangalore chapter and has served in various capacities for over 20 years. He was recognized as a Paul Harris Fellow by the Rotary International for his contribution to social sector projects. Currently, Amar is involved as founder nurturing two not-for-profit social sector organizations, Prakalpa Saujanya, as we've already mentioned, and Mitra Can Care, which hopes to bring together a suite of support services to enhance cancer awareness in society and provide end-to-end cancer care support as services to patients. His hobbies include photography and carpentry. So I will now hand it over to both Praveen and Amar to continue, take the session forward.
Thank you so much, Ramesh. Thank you for your wonderful introduction for the topic today. We have NEP 2020, a game changer for New India. I know this is a very much talked about subject. Why do we call this game changer? National education policy, was framed way back in 1986. and it was modified in 92 for some specific areas, and then it didn't go through much change later. But however, a lot of changes have happened all around us, especially introduction of the technology and ways of learning and so on. So I'm really glad that, we have had finally a review of this policy, and then it's been modified, revised, and being rolled out, and definitely being targeted to really transform our country in that specific sense. We'll come to a little bit about national education policy really highlight. The key point seems to be that there's not going to be any more board exam in the 10th standard. There will be a different type of a scheme which is being used. People will be starting the education right from their nursery level onwards. Earlier it was 1 to 10 plus 2. And now they will introduce this new scheme of a 5-year plus 3-year plus 3-year plus 4-year, which helps in really formalizing everything for the good foundation for education. So these are good welcome signs from an overall policy point of view. And these are going to be very, very interesting. This topic, considering challenges of realizing its impact on sustainability, I really want to straight away go into, how feasible it's going to impact and what it is going to really do to our country. As soon as this national education policy was rolled out, we had several headlines all across many journals, news channels, that the National Education Policy 2020 envisions an India-centric education system that provides high quality of education to all, and thereby transforming India. Now, the real question comes to my mind is, in terms of the benefit, in terms of the impact that it's going to create. If this policy has been changed after 34 years with a revised focus on access to quality education as a real underlying theme, then are we really prepared for this? How do you think this is going to benefit the students, the teachers, and the society at large, perhaps the nation? And this is the first thought that comes to everybody's mind. And I want to really start with this as our, discussion for this topic. I would like to, turn it around to Mr. Praveen, who has been part of the education curriculum at SUYM and has been heading the strategic initiatives over there to really touch upon, and has really been a veteran on the national education policy in terms of what it addresses and how it covers. So let me just turn this to Praveen. So what is the impact?
It's true that we have been talking about the policy after over 3 decades. And if you read this particular NEP in isolation, it's a document of great intent. In fact, the politics aside, there is hardly any statement in the entire NEP where you can contest saying that this is good for a child or not good for a child. In that way, the national education policy in its present form is a definite step forward. Now, what can we achieve or what fraction of the intent will we be able to achieve is for us to wait and see. Now, with respect to the impact part, I personally believe that the timing is right. For a long time, access to education itself was a great challenge in our country. In the late 90s, the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan program was rolled out. We had opened up a huge number of schools. By the time the RTE came into place, we had the necessary infrastructure in place to be able to assure elementary education to every child. That is when we brought the Right to Education Act. But the necessary infrastructure was put in place. It took 10 years for us to do it, but we are able to do it. from there, from 2009 onwards, the focus then sort of shifted to the Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan, the secondary education and so on. And in fact, most people don't refer to it much, but there was already an early childhood education policy, ECC, care and education policy, which came out about 8-9 years ago. So the preparatory phase has been going on for quite some time. It is only, I would say that the NEP being formally accepted and then being rolled out is only to sharpen our initiatives to hit specific targets that we were looking at. But we have been progressing in that direction for quite some time. So in terms of do we have the necessary infrastructure, do we have the necessary capabilities, I have no questions. But then politics will play its role, and then we'll have to sort of wait and watch the directions that we will take.
Yeah. Interesting about the infra that you straight away mentioned. In fact, I was about to ask on that point as are we ready? Are we ready to roll a robust policy which will cover in par with many other global educations? First of all, who is this other countries? Whom are we comparing this with? You know, is it part of the Asian environment or is it part of the global environment? There's no speak about it from the policy point of view. Where does it compare? And so, because I was looking at also the infrastructure, where does it compare?
Yeah, comparison is a dangerous thing. And just to sort of give you an anecdote, there is this program for international student assessment. It is called PISA, where they compare the learning levels of 15-year-olds across the globe. And this is usually done in the OECD countries. So they assess students on 3 areas. One is the literary skills, language skills, one on science and maths. These are the 3 areas on which students are assessed. In 2009, India participated in this PISA assessment. It is done once in 3 years. And in India as a whole didn't participate at that point. It was the states of Himachal Pradesh and Tamil Nadu which had participated in that PISA assessment. We came, the 2 states of Himachal Pradesh and Tamil Nadu came 72nd and 74th in one of those criterias, and 73rd and 74th on 2 criterias out of 74 territories which participated in the study. Now, in terms of our learning levels, at that point we were the study was criticized, saying that it is not appropriate for the Indian ecosystem and so on and all that. Now, but if you compare, we didn't do very well. That is one thing. The second thing, there is another study which keeps happening year on year. It is called the ACER study, which Pratham and the government together bring out. And every year on year, there is a damning report which comes out where they really question the learning that happens in the foundational level and then slightly higher in the higher grades. Again, this study is criticized for its method of sampling and so on, and the method of the data collection and so on. Now, it is one thing to say that the study is inappropriate, and on the other side, to start with accepting the fact that maybe there is something to improve. The gap might not be as much as those studies might indicate, but there is a gap, and that's a fact. We are not able to say or compare ourselves with global benchmarks at this point. In fact, the NEP also doesn't compare the ecosystem or the infrastructure in India with any other country at this point. Like, for example, a few years ago, there was a lot of discussion around the education system in Finland. saying that the Nordic countries have the best possible education systems. And few months or few years later, then there was this study which said if the education system is good, why can't we explain, or why are there so many suicides in the Nordic countries? Suicidal rates are the highest there. So there is no one indicator we can pick and say that, okay, this is where we stand, we would want to improve. Now, access is something which can be addressed, but quality is very difficult to determine because the priorities are different for each country. So there is an aspiration that we want to do better, and then where we want to reach is going to be defined by us, not necessarily according to some global benchmarks. Having said that, India is also participating in the PISA study. After 2009, after such bad results, we walked out of the PISA assessment. Actually, India is participating in the latest PISA assessment now again. But this time we are being a bit more careful. We are saying that only the Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalayas and the Kendriya Vidyalayas will participate in the PISA assessment. So we don't know what, like in the sense, like we are not benchmarking ourselves against any other global standard. With respect to access 100%, we are saying that the gross enrollment ratio, meaning how many kids at a particular age group have to be in school. We want to reach the targets of 100% across all age groups in the school education level. When it goes to higher education, we want to have at least 50% of our students accessing higher education. Today, gross enrollment ratio in higher education is around 24 or 25%. So essentially, we are saying that in the next 10 years, we want to double that. Not even 10 years. In the next 8 years, we want to double that. So indicators with respect to access, we have numbers. Indicators with respect to quality, we are not benchmarking ourselves against any global standard.
Right. But however, the point is that this is aiming at giving quality access to the for education. And since we don't have the numbers, so what would we be aiming at? So let me look at it from a comparison of within ourselves here between government schools and the other private institutions. There is a big, disparity that we see here, from the kind of facilities, from the kind of environment, from the kind of, infra that some of these private institutions have to compare to the government. So does it not create a big amount of disparity? And would this policy be able to address some of these gaps? Ramesh, are you there?
Yeah. Did we lose Praveen from here?
Praveen's line is down, I think.
No, I think he's there. Praveen, you seem to be muted. Let me.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't have very stable connection.
So I don't know if you missed a question on that one, Praveen. So while we compared on, trying to say that there was no benchmark against the quality per se, would there be a comparison between the government schools to the private institutions in our country itself? And there's a big disparity there.
Yes, yeah, in fact, even with respect to quality, let me clarify my statement. I said that there are studies and benchmarks across the world. In the policy, we are not trying to compare ourselves with someone outside India.
Right.
And now the learning gaps between urban, rural, between boys and girls, between public, private institutions are a reality. The contributors, and in fact, the difference is very stark also. And the contributors for this disparity, we have a long list. We don't know how much each factor is contributing, but it is a reality. On the contrast, if you look at in terms of technical capabilities or in terms of resource availabilities, the public education system, and I can talk with respect to Karnataka.
Mm-hmm.
The government schools have the best pupil teacher ratios. The system as a whole. I'm not talking about any one school in isolation.
Okay.
In fact, the government has better number of teachers. The government has better qualified teachers than the private setup. How they are put into use, or how is the learning environment in the school, or why is the student not able to learn to the optimal levels, is a systemic challenge which needs to be addressed. But the disparities are very, very evident. And they also come up very starkly in the assessment called as the Karnataka State KSQA6. And the distinction is also very evident in the National Achievement Survey, which is carried out. So the gaps are very.
Is the line down again?
Yeah, I think it's down.
Having a line on this line.
Yeah, but Praveen, you're back, but I think you might want to have only the audio on. So.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, so I think I'm my audio. The last part of what I was saying was the disparity is very evident across the system with gender, with even the social groups. In fact, the learning gaps between the school average versus the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes is also very evident. Now, these are systemic issues with multiple factors contributing to that. And while there are specific initiatives which are trying to address it, like for example, the gap between girls and boys learning is being addressed through one of the government's initiative called the Kasturba Gandhi Balika Vidyalayas.
Yeah.
It has improved access. It has contributed to definitely improving learning outcomes. So the gap is narrowing. It is definitely not narrowing at a pace that we would like. There's much more to be done.
Right. So you touched upon one important point, or highlighted that the government teachers, the government school teachers rather, are competent. They are good in many ways. And see, one of the things that this national policy also highlights is about a transformational journey. And it in one of the articles, it quotes that, the teachers are the torch bearers of this change. And what is your view on this, that, are they would be leading the initiative from the front? Do we have sufficient numbers of this? Or are there some pockets of excellence in some schools, whereas it is not a very systemic thing across the entire set of public schools? So how do we do that gap again, of making this systemic?
Yeah, I do agree, and I believe very strongly in the fact that teachers will be the torchbearers of this change. And I had realized this personally through my experience of working with teachers in the rural areas. We were running a mobile science lab, and you could do year on year, repeat the same thing, and every year there is a new batch of kids who will come back to schools, right? So if this change has to be sustainable, to train a teacher and then the teacher will do it for 30 years. So it is the teachers who will have to sort of continue what is being started now. And the other thing, which is also a fact, and most of us don't even talk much about it, is there is an enormous trust which is placed on the teachers. For example, if you allocate a 40-minute period to a teacher, there is a lot of review with respect to what a teacher is planning to do in those 40 minutes. There is maybe a review after the class is over with respect to how much syllabus has been completed and so on. But for the duration of 40 minutes, you are trusting the teacher to do what the teacher is supposed to be doing, or the teacher is prepared to do, and in the best possible manner. So there is no way there is some sort of real-time monitoring that we can have for all the teachers, and so it's not like your operating machines. So if we have the right set of teachers in terms of capabilities and attitudes, we can definitely reach the desired learning outcomes that we intend to achieve. However, as a system, are we conducive enough for a teacher who wants to, let's say, experiment something? I don't think we are there as yet. We are a system which is much more comfortable with status quo.
Yeah.
We are, as a system, we are much more comfortable with doing the bare minimum that is necessary. And not necessarily seeing something as a window of opportunity where I would want to try something new. I'll just give a couple of examples and then stop. I work with a group of teachers, science teachers, who used to work with me in the tribal areas, were very motivated, value driven, and would focus on not just completing syllabus, or would not focus just on helping students pass, but actually learn the subject. So all these teachers, being the value driven, would not be part of and support any systemic push towards copying and malpractices, which is there prevalent in a big way in the system today. So these teachers who have built their capabilities to a level where they can become resource persons for others. And then there is another bunch of teachers who don't necessarily subscribe to this sort of thinking, but they think copying is okay, helping students pass is okay. And the government issues letters annually saying that based on the pass percentage, the government issues a letter to teachers whose where the pass percentage is above 90%, saying that you are a good teacher. And for a teacher whose pass percentage in the pass percentage of students in that subject is only maybe 75-80, says you are an average teacher and you should seek guidance from a good teacher. So if you're trying to systemize this sort of, one letter being sent to every teacher throughout the state, you are not encouraging values. You are not, and systemically we are saying helping students pass is more important than helping students achieve their true potential. So these are things which need to be addressed. And as a system, I don't think we are there as yet. There is a lot of work that has to be done with respect to that component.
Right. So let me just see what we thought through all this while is this is a game changer. There's a transformational initiative, and it perhaps needs a right level of environment, right content, and the delivery in terms of the right faculty, the transformational initiatives by those teachers. As you said, they will play a pivotal role in being able to roll out this policy. And one of the things that comes to my mind, coming from the program management profession, are there any things in terms of achievable timelines or anything that the policy talks about? And where are we in terms of achieving those?
The NEP is, I think, one of those rare policies where even the timeline is prescribed. And the timeline is very ambitious. In fact, one of the things that the policy talks about is that the policy came out in 2020, and it did mention about a national curriculum framework being brought out in 2021. It talked about new textbooks being brought out in 2022. It spoke about the minimum learning levels being achieved across the foundational learning levels by 2025 across India. And it spoke about every single recommendation of the NEP coming into action and the system being put in place by 2030. Having said that, one of the good things that has happened is the government actually brought out a document at the school, for the school education part of the policy, brought out a document called Sartak, where they broke down the NEP document into 297 action points, along with identifying the key stakeholder in driving that action point and the timeline for it. So which are those action points where the state governments have to play a role? Which are those action points where NCERT has to play a role? And so on. So they have actually identified those 297 action points. Stakeholder wise, timeline wise, they have logically arranged all of this. We are already behind in terms of the timeline by at least a year. However, one thing which I am happy about is that they are not doing the, should I say, the sequencing of the issues at least is right. Just to sort of give one more example of where we had failed earlier, but things like this have been addressed now. In 2005, the government brought out what is called as the National Curricular Framework, based on which we had introduced a new evaluation system called the Continuous and Comprehensive Evaluation, CCE, which was introduced in all the schools in 2009, 4 years later. However, the first batch of teachers who were formally trained during their B.Ed on how CCE works came out in 2015. And by then, CCE was deemed as a disaster and they had fundamentally changed the way it was to operate.
Right.
This time at least, the focus is now on building capacities first. The focus is now on changing the curriculum. That sequencing of action points is definitely appropriate, whatever is being done now. Are they doing it at the right pace? Definitely not at the pace at what has been recommended in the policy. But it is definitely happening at a pace which the system can absorb. And Karnataka that way is sort of a pioneer in implementing the NEP.
Right. Since you touched on that assessment point, Praveen, the revised policy actually is talking about students can do more than one course, can take a break from the main course, go and do another related area of interest, and they come back. And the assessment system is changed to academic banking credits. Now, since you touched on this point, now we had disaster with that area, but what makes us think that this will work better? And isn't that a cultural change shift from the earlier exam-oriented assessment to this type of an assessment? What is your take on this?
See, the whole policy revolves around providing flexibility. Yeah. See, if you look at the old examination system or how the examination system has evolved, we have sort of stuck to those 3 languages and 3 subjects for a long time. Right? And then CBSE, in its wisdom, few years ago said, no, there are this whole bunch of areas called post-scholastic areas, which also are important. And it is okay if you don't pass in all the 6 core subjects. If you are doing fairly well in the post-scholastic areas, we will still pass you. But someone doing well in arts or music or games or sports was not considered equivalent to someone doing well in science or maths. This policy hopefully will be a step forward in that direction. I don't think it 100% is bringing in parity between the co-scholastic areas and the scholastic areas. However, it is providing flexibility for a student to adopt or pick up courses, especially in the senior secondary education level and up and higher, to choose courses which the student is really keen on or the student might be good at. So as a flexibility, definitely, I think it's a great thing. However, the unfortunate reality is that even at the higher education level, we are driven by our preparation is driven by the previous 5 years question papers. So unless we move away from that system of preparing for an exam to learning the subject, that's a big step forward. That is, I think it's a mindset change both for the teachers as well as the students. Right. The policy will be a success, or the new initiatives will be a success only when we shift our focus to learning and not just on passing or scoring some certain grades.
Right. I was curious to know if the policy has anything to address about the special child or the students with some disabilities and so on from an inclusiveness perspective, while this policy is being targeted to really be, global, give quality access and so on. Are we taking care of this area?
Yes, sir. In fact, that aspect of, bringing inclusiveness or bringing inclusion in a classroom is not new to this policy. It has been spoken about earlier. The Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan as a policy did have that. The Right to Education Act brought in inclusion. The Rights of People with Disabilities Act, which came out in 2016, brought inclusion. Unfortunate, and this NEP 2020 also brings in inclusion. Unfortunately, they all stay as ideas.
That was my
like,
question. Yeah.
so if you go to the government has a website called UDICE, where they have information related to every single school in the entire country. Now the measure of how inclusive a school is, unfortunately, has been reduced to how many schools have a ramp.
Yeah.
It does not talk about whether it is a 1:12 or a 1:10 ramp. It talks about having a ramp. And the achievement is some 99.96 or 97% across the country. So on paper, we have become inclusive schools across the country. However, outside the compound wall of that school, is that school accessible? We don't know. If a blind kid comes to us, comes and sits in my classroom, and if I am so used to using a PowerPoint presentation,
Yeah.
how will I teach that kid? Are our teachers equipped with the necessary skill set?
Right.
It's a long way to go. So
Right.
the first step towards that would be building that sensitivity or sensitization of teachers in accepting kids with different abilities.
Right.
We as a society, we seem to overdiagnose, right? The moment the movie Tare Zameen Par was released, half of India became dyslexic or was branded as dyslexic. But we as teachers don't think about, okay, there is a challenge, what should I do? Instead, we brand the kid. So the policy has great intentions. The inclusion has always been the theme for a long time. It's not new to NEP. However, our preparedness for it, I think there is a long way to go with respect to teacher education.
Absolutely. You touched upon those points very well from that point of view. Yes, but the same thing is that well done in the private schools? Because I do see even in those areas they may not be doing too well.
Private schools are more exclusive than government schools. I generally, my observation has been that private schools may not deny admission, but they are not welcoming enough of children with special needs. So they might say that we are very inclusive, but we don't have kids. But as a system, if you are not welcoming enough, whatever we say about inclusion, I think it's not appropriate. And my general observation has been government schools are much more inclusive than private schools.
Yeah, so Praveen, from a strategy perspective, what is the NEP's take or NEP's vision thoughts on how do they bridge overall? Private schools will continue to have all this lot of good infrastructure and all that stuff, while the government schools to catch up will take a long time to come there. And there's also a drift of teachers away from government schools to private schools because they are paid differently. They have a lot of other benefits and so on. So when will this catch up? What is the strategy that, that people will consider this as equal? When will that
happen? It's difficult to put a timeline to it. But as an intention, I think, there is one aspect of the NEP which talks about school standards and accreditation. And being those, in fact, they propose to set up a school standards authority. And that school standards are supposed to be uniform for both public and private schools. If such a set of standards is put in place, then it will become mandatory for the government to, at least with respect to the infrastructure, to quickly catch up. And being the government, they can actually do it much faster than the private schools to cope up with that requirement. But I think I think it's not as easy as I am putting it. Like when the RTE, Right to Education Act, was rolled out, it had mentioned some specific standards that each school had to meet. And 1 year after the RTE came into place, I had applied through RTI application, asking for information of how many schools within that HT Kote taluk comply with the provisions under the RTE. For the schools with deficiencies, what is the plan? These were my questions. The response from the government functionary was about those few schools, few private schools in which kids have been enrolled under RT. Now, it was shocking for me to know that the government official and someone at the level of a block education officer thinks RTE is not applicable for the government schools at all. While the right to education, when you are promising free and compulsory education, the government schools are the vehicles for providing free and compulsory education.
Right.
So as long as the government thinks that I'll make some 100 rules applicable and all of these are applicable for the private schools only, as long as they keep thinking of these challenges that way, these issues cannot be addressed very easily. In terms of necessary infrastructure also, I don't think the government schools are very far off behind private schools. Be it the number of classrooms, be it the playground required and so on. The upkeep of the available facilities is a question mark. I agree.
Right.
But in terms of availability of facilities itself, I don't think they are very far behind.
Yeah. So what's actually fundamental? Sorry.
No, I was just about to end it, saying that these things are more to do with our thinking and not necessarily about the hard infrastructure itself.
Right. So I was about to come to that point. What makes them think that they should not send their students or their children to the government school, rather send it to a private? Is that something like a status symbol, or why would any family decide to send their students there? Because many of these government schools today, you talked about the UID, and if you go there and then see all the data, some of the schools don't have enough students, enough students to take care of. So why is that happening then?
One, I think as a society, there is there's an aspiration to provide good education. And education has sort of been agreed by everyone that education is the means out of poverty. Unfortunately, it has been understood that good education is available only in private schools. English medium education is seen as good education. Kids wearing a uniform and traveling by a school bus is seen as good education. I happened to visit a famous, reputed international school in Bangalore a few years ago. They were showing me all these facilities, that we have a cricket stadium, we have a football stadium, we teach horse riding here, we have a swimming pool and so on. I said, yeah, I agree that your international school has all these facilities, but what happens inside a classroom? And then I sat in a classroom, and it was as good or as bad as in a private school and in any other private school.
Hmm.
So today we are sold this idea that it's a great school by the facilities they provide.
Right.
And we seem to equate quality of education to the facilities available and maybe some decent English that is taught there.
Right.
It's a myth. I think it's high time that we break it. We should agree that English is important, but English medium need not be important.
Hmm.
We can still continue to be local medium, local language medium schools with English being taught well.
Right.
We can continue to be providing good quality education by ensuring that the minimum levels of learning is achieved. You know, one of the reasons there is a loss of faith in the system is because at the elementary level, we have not been able to accomplish or assure minimum levels of learning. I had this challenge once when I was talking to a tribal parent whom I asked, why don't you send your kid continuously to school? And the parent asked me, if this boy can't, this kid was in 7th or 8th grade, he had dropped out of school. He asked me, if my son can't read a letter which I get home after being in school for 7 years, what is the use of schooling?
Hmm.
And it's a reality.
Hmm.
Today in the elementary education, we have lots of high school teachers complain that in 8th grade, they start teaching them alphabets. They start teaching them mathematical tables in 8th grade because they don't learn enough or nothing has been taught in grade 1 to 7. If those gaps in the government system are addressed, I think the focus, I mean, the government, there'll be this faith that will be brought back to the government system and kids might actually eventually move back to government schools. There are also new islands of excellence within the government system that are coming up. For example, the Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalayas are doing very well. Across the state, the government has set up what are called as Adarsha Vidyalayas, which are doing fairly well.
Hmm.
The Morarji Desai schools are doing fairly well.
Hmm.
So there are more and more of these schools. Again, all of them are islands of excellence, where we are addressing few of these challenges. But as a system, only when we can assure minimum learning levels for children, only then we will at least be able to arrest movement of kids from government schools to private schools.
Right.
For them coming back, I think there's still a long way to go.
Right. So Praveen, an area which we might like to summarize and then do is, what do you think are the 5 key challenges in being able to implement the NEP 2020? You've talked about some timelines where it has taken a very long time to come with some of the deliverables and milestones being achieved. So this is a very long-term vision and a long-term plan. What are those 5 key challenges you would like to say for a diverse country like ours? And we know the status, we know the disparities that exist. We got to cover all that. Even if there's a way to just reset it off and then go ahead to just adopt and implement simply the NEP 2020. What are those 5 key challenges that we would face?
I think, like you mentioned in your question, India is such a diverse country. We definitely can't have one size fits all sort of a solution. The first primary challenge, I think, is even accepting the shortcomings of the existing system.
Hmm.
I would just like to mention, one change I have seen is there was, after the NEP came out, there was a period of maybe 6 to 8 months when there was a lot of uncertainty. lot of people would approach me saying that what is going to happen with to the private schools, what will be the medium of instruction and so on. Today, the same set of schools keep claiming that we have been implementing the provisions under the NEP for the last 10 years. Now, I think that is one of the challenge. If you are not accepting that we are where we are today, this is the delta which we have to improve, and then put systems in place to improve that. If we continue to tell ourselves that we are already doing a good job, then there is no way we can achieve what we intend to. I think that's the primary challenge. The second one is because of the diversity and the expanse of the country, the number of stakeholders that we engage with. Like for example, in the state of Karnataka, I was surprised to know that any small change that has to be brought out, there is a strong teachers union force that the system has to fight. And supposedly Karnataka has some 16 different teachers unions,
Right.
which who can sort of make or break the system. So buying in support from everyone is one key challenge. The third one is the interplay between the departments. For example, early childhood care and education has never been seen as a part of school education. In fact, kids below 6 years were always under the purview of the Women and Child Development Department. They were never under the Education Department. Now, all of a sudden, that has been brought under the Education Department, and there is a turf war happening between the departments. So how these departments work together and how do they take it forward is one critical challenge which will definitely needs to be addressed. Because I have seen meetings break down, I have seen things not happening because of this. The
Right.
the fourth challenge is prioritizing what we want to do now. You know, like I mentioned, there are 297 action points. That number 297 is pretty overwhelming. So should we start with a few things and then move one to the other, or do it in phases? There is no way we can actually say that we will implement the entire NEP within the next 5 years. Instead, I think it is better to sort of time them properly, pick up the high priority things and then address them. The last key challenge that I look at and I think is very, very important is also look at this policy from a financial viability and a demographic viability point of view. The population, the demography is changing. You know, the NFHS survey came out recently. In the state of Karnataka, the number of kids below the age of 15 as a fraction of the entire population for the first time after India's independence has actually decreased. So the school going age group is going to fall. We will need lesser number of schools in the future. So there's no point in opening more and more schools. The other thing is we already know that about 40% of the schools that we already run are small schools, which have one teacher or two teachers. It might not be viable to run such schools. So there's a financial implication to it. We also know that on the other hand, we are saying that every subject needs a specialized teacher. Now, if it's a small school of 40, 50 kids, you can't have a subject-wise teacher. So somewhere based on the demographic projections, somewhere looking at the financial viability of schools, taking those difficult calls of rationalizing or consolidation of schools is a big challenge we have on hand.
Perfect, Praveen. You highlighted all those points in terms of the challenge that we really have with this policy. It's really viewed as a very long term. And I have some couple of questions from the audience as well. Let me quickly pick this up. And one of the questions is, in a teaching and learning concept, family atmosphere is very important. We teachers might be having a high competency level, but the factors around the child is always influencing a lot on child's behavior. So is there any, what's your take on this in terms of NEP? Is there anything to address this?
Yeah, I think for the first time, again, the policy is looking at teaching values and teaching culture and ethics, and all these things are seen as part of education. I mean, I think that way we have expanded the definition of education from those 6 subjects to anything and everything that a kid has to learn. But the society is also changing, right? We are moving away from those big families where the grandparents are there to take care of the children and nurture their thinking, to a very nuclear family where in all likelihood both parents are also working or busy. It's also argued that a maximum share of the time when the kid is awake, actually the kid spends at school. So while we can argue both ways about whether the family is important or not in terms of what education the kid has to get, I think as teachers, like if I were to put myself in the teacher's shoes, we should look at how do I optimize those 6 hours of learning experience that a kid gets when he or she is at school. It is not just those subjects, but as a learning experience of sharing and caring for the people around me. And how do you imbibe those values into the children as a learning experience is something for all of us to look at. And these can't be put down into a curriculum. I think unless we, and as long as we keep fooling ourselves that we have values taught through a syllabus,
right,
I think we will be heading nowhere.
Yeah. In fact, I used to be reminded of that. We used to have, conduct and moral science as some subjects earlier during our school days, but I don't see that to be a part of the curriculum anymore. So the question here is assessment. Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Praveen.
No, I was just saying with respect to the moral science thing, there was this big discussion around inclusion of values in education. So the CBSE system came out with a list of values which would get integrated into all subjects. So there would be let's say there would be in mathematics, there would be a problem statement, and then you solve the problem. And then there is one question on what values are there in this scenario that is being discussed. Unfortunately, even those list of 57, 58 values have been reduced to a list of 57 or 58 values from where you have to choose one to get those 1 or 2 marks. It is not that you really internalize those 57 or 58 values and apply it to a real life situation.
Yep. So, but you see, the NEP 2020, which was my last question, is when students have to get off from here and then get into the jobs, they still look at, the evaluation from a marks secured point of view and so on. So, what is the disconnect over there in terms of education to evaluation to the way they are evaluated in the organizations for jobs. Do you see there is a disconnect there?
Definitely. I think that you need not go very far till jobs. Just as you can't allocate medical seats based on the scores that the kids score in PU, in pre-university, the disconnect is very, very evident, right? So, and this disconnect is evident, and it exists because our preparation is towards an exam and not necessarily learning a subject.
Right.
Now, the day you learn biology because you are interested in learning biology and not about which is the most important chapter which will carry 5 marks and I have to draw, some diagrams or answer these many questions. The day we make the transition, I think those disconnects will get addressed.
Fantastic.
And we continue to be an exam-driven system. So unless the focus sort of shifts away from it, or unless the exam becomes radically different, where your application knowledge is tested instead of just remembering facts, only then maybe we will improve.
Right. So thanks, Praveen, for that really insightful discussion. We started off with as a game changer for New India. And I think surely it is. It is a game changer. It's a transformational initiative, and no doubt about that. I think we highlighted a lot of those, which are all there, and first is to really accept it. Second, really to understand that there is a shift in the way the 1 to 3 year, the 3 to 6 years category is being addressed. And then there's a financial viability point of view, prioritization, all these challenges which are all there, and especially the last point that we talked about. Finally, it all boils down to whether you give away that exam evaluation thing, or you still have to keep that in order to get into competitive seats in various other degree kind of education before you go off to jobs. And so all those discounts are still there. So really insightful in terms of highlighting what NEP 2020 is all about with that. And thank you so much for that discussion. I hand over to Ramesh now. Ramesh, over to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Kumar. Thank you, Praveen. That was quite an insightful discussion. And I think we touched the entire thing. I think the issue is that we might have touched many things, but NEP itself is so vast, and education itself is so vast that there is so much that we still need to be discussing. Just wanted to get one point in about the holistic approach to values and other things. The only issue being that as long as we continue to talk about ethics, morality, and all of those things, we must not forget that the morality ethics of the Indian culture is very subjective and contextual, whereas the morality that comes from a Western lens is very objective and rigid. So we must not forget the embedding that needs to be correctly looked at. So having said that, I think I wanted to thank all of you, thank everyone who has come in. I think the recorded version also would be posted on YouTube. And thank you. We will continue to have it, like I said, the 4th Saturday of every month, where we'll have the development sector dialogues, and we will keep the dialogues going on a variety of subjects. Thank you, everyone, and have a great weekend.
Right, you too. Thank you so much again, Ramesh and Praveen. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.